So thank you so much. This is cathartic. This is kind of, I think all three of us feel that we're kind of opening a page to ourselves and the way that we have kind of grown to think. So buckle up. We're going to go on a little bit of a journey. And I'd like to start that journey with beer. Since I was born in a small little town of about 20,000 people called Einbeck, which is in Lower Saxony or Niedersachsen. And it has a brewery that dates from 1378. And the entire town was a kind of one industry town. And one of the strongest beers to come out of Germany is Bock beer. And the story goes that Bock is a derivative of Beck. Ein Beck, bitte, ein Einbecker, ein Bock beer, because it was so strong. And that Bock then translated to, if you want a strong beer, reach for an Einbecker. Einbeck is this tiny little town, and it is surrounded by a moat and is a medieval center. It is built entirely out of timber frame construction. Most of the buildings in that heart of the city were built between sort of the 1500s and 1600s. So if you start to think about what is sustainable architecture, imagine that these buildings have been around for 400 years. They have been reused and reimagined and reprogrammed in that entire time. When you look at this city, you don't know what is a residence, what is a commercial space, what is even where you go to see a doctor. It's all there. And then you start to see that this is a town that doesn't have a single right angle. Everything leans or juts out. So all of this timber frame construction that was built has been the original buildings that have been renovated, loved, added to throughout that time. And you have, of course, these incredible wood carvers that started to write little stories of who lived in these buildings over that time. So just like the previous speakers, I think travel and traveling has had a great influence. So even being in a space like tonight, when you live in a town that is entirely wood frame construction with tiny little windows, imagine what happens when your family goes to Paris and you stand in this little chapel and you begin to see the walls dissolve in light and the way that the glass takes over everything. It was magic. So just being there, not even thinking about architecture, just the emotion and the feeling of being in a space that was so unique and different left a great impression upon me. And then, of course, we traveled like everyone throughout sort of Europe, went to the beaches in Italy, traveled to the castles, this one in Heidelberg. And those kind of travels of seeing these kind of remnants and edifices of different time periods was then me trying to recreate that out of the one material that I knew how to build, Lego. So, and I'm sure Lego plays a role in many of our lives here, but this is when the Yellow Castle was kind of first produced. It's also the first Lego set that had the little miniature Lego man. And the Lego suddenly became human, and you started to be able to create narratives with it. So this was a kind of very important point of seeing how one could create these different worlds. But the story goes somewhere different. My father was kind of headhunted from an American company from Germany to come with the entire family in 1976 to the United States. And we received green cards, all of us, without any trouble. This was pre all of the current kind of make America only American again. And my parents decided that rather than to fly over, we would take a journey on the Queen Mary ocean liner. So we actually got into the boat, I think it was Kiel Harbor, and we started to come across the ocean. You know, I was just 6 years old. The impression of making that trip on that ocean liner, and the first thing I saw in America was the Statue of Liberty. We then docked onto Chelsea Piers, and from there we traveled down to Georgia. Georgia was a tiny, LaGrange, Georgia was a tiny little town, just like Einbeck, but this time about 30,000 inhabitants. And it was a textile town. My father was a textile engineer, and he was recruited to come to this town. And it's a very southern town. It has a main square called Lafayette Square. Lafayette was the French general who came across during the Revolutionary War, and he helped the Americans defeat the British. And so in honor of Lafayette, they dedicated this square to him. And then our football team for the high school was the LaGrange Grangers, or Grangeau, farmer. So we were the LaGrange farmers, all sort of like very, very kind of like excited about this kind of tie to the whole French Revolutionary War. Because Lafayette came into the town, took off his tri-cornered hat and said, "This reminds me of the farms in France." And I came to America in this impressionable time, and all I thought about was, you can get the world's best hamburgers and hot dogs in LaGrange, Georgia. Who would have thought? And it's that American kind of, who cares what the real story is? We're going to make a story, and we have the world's best hamburgers and hot dogs. So you leave one reality, which is this 400, 500-year traditional timber frame town, and you come to a small southern town that is just creating its history, that's not even 100 years old, and you begin to sort of see how these kinds of things start to sort of shape you. So when you are in a small town, and maybe some of you have the same kind of history or experience, you don't have a lot of architecture to look at. You don't have a lot of impressions in that same way. So you dive into different things. And I really dove into music and the kind of collecting of different sounds, both from Europe, where I'd come from, like Kraftwerk, Tangerine Dream, but also really beginning to love the music that was bubbling and gurgling up just a few hours away in Athens, Georgia, with REM, flat duo jets, the B-52s, all out of Athens, Georgia. And so this record collection and listening and going to sort of concerts, that became a real sort of creative outlet during my sort of high school years. Then an event happened where Atlanta, Georgia, was sort of the next largest city. It had just received a brand new building by Richard Meyer, the High Museum, and there was an exhibition happening. This is, I just checked, it was 1985, of Frank Gehry's architecture on one floor, Kandinsky and his paintings on another floor. And I remember going and being just amazed at this incredible world of expression. Expressing yourself in different materials, thinking of architecture not just as buildings, but furniture. He, of course, had a lot of his kind of cardboard studies, things that you don't even see or know anymore that he had been doing at the time. And these, he grew up in Toronto, and they had fish, of course, once a week. And his mother would go out, buy the live fish, and bring them back to home and fill the bathtub and put the live fish into the bathtub, and then allowed him to play with the fish until they were for dinner. So that trauma of playing with the fish and then eating it later that night led to a lifetime of trying to recreate fish out of formica. But learning about all of that and understanding where some of the forms are coming from and the kind of fluidity of space in Gary's work, again, left a kind of an impression. So I chose a university, which is University of Virginia, to start my architectural journey. I really, after seeing the show and thinking about where my future would be, I remembered the trips to the castles, the churches, and I remembered the feeling I got from seeing that exhibition. So I applied to architecture school. And when you go to University of Virginia, this is a university, the first public university in the United States. All previous schools like Harvard or Yale were actually divinity schools. They were religious-based schools that were private. This was the first public because Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, stated that the only way democracy could work is if you had an educated public. And therefore, he founded the University of Virginia. And its main sort of building is the Rotunda, which is the library. It's surrounded by professorial kind of buildings where the professors lived upstairs and taught downstairs. And then you had the student housing that was surrounding the actual kind of classrooms. In the back of that were gardens where they would grow the food, and then behind that were social buildings and more student rooms. So this was the first kind of campus, and from 1829. I know for an Amsterdam public that is like yesterday, but for America that's pretty old. And while there, I'm working in the library to earn a few extra dollars, and I wasn't really working. So I was basically in the back reading as much and exposing myself to as much as I could. And I took a stack of Forum magazine, which is a Dutch magazine, from 1949 until I think it was discontinued in the early 70s, and I went through every single issue. And I came across Aldo van Eyck's issue, which was this incredible study of vernacular architecture, where he studied the Taos Native Americans in New Mexico, and he studied the Dogon people of West Africa, and he just made certain parallels of how people organized space in those cultures and made associations and thought that they had actually developed certain spatial relationships far better than what was happening in modernism at the time. So his architecture, this is the orphanage here, I think in Amsterdam, that a municipal orphanage is in so many ways both inspired and developed out of his travels to Mali and seeing how the villages in the Dogon region, right on the kind of cliffside, were developed and how the families had structured social spaces in between the rooms so that you had a good experience. And then, of course, these more object-like mosques that were built in West Africa, and seeing this incredible adobe architecture. This is rammed earth, which is 4 to 5 stories tall. Also at the University of Virginia, they had a program which was in the Veneto in Vicenza. So I went to Vicenza, I lived there for 4 months, and I was basically introduced to the work of Carlo Scarpa. And because I had this interest in materiality of glass, stone, metal, blacksmithing, I finally found an architect that had sort of found a way to bring in the craftsmanship and the artistry of making things into a kind of spatial order, his own order. And then I learned that he also was a glass artist, making designs for Venini, which is one of the main kind of glass houses of Murano. So these are just little sort of impressions that start to build and layer kind of the path and the journey that I decided to take. And this is John Rousseau, a professor that I had at the University of Virginia. And he was teaching the watercoloring class. And he is, as you can see, he's an artist in his own right. He had a sailboat sailing up and down the northeast coast. He had a little home on Fire Island. And he said to me these words. He goes, "Kai, the 3 best things about college are June, July, and August." And I was like, okay, that's when I'm not at the university? He's like, exactly. And he goes, you'll never have that much free time again. And he goes, use it wisely. And I took that to mean that you have to take the time to look around. And the time, university is just there to kind of teach you tools. But you're sitting in dark rooms looking at slides just like you are tonight, right? You're not actually experiencing anything. So I realized that it was time to actually get out. So I read this book, and it's The Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. It's about a guy who rides his motorcycle across the country, and he's like going around, wind's blowing his hair, and he's enjoying life, and the motorcycle starts to break down. And so he realizes that his enjoyment is also proportional to having a balance with the machinery that is the motorcycle, and that he needs to keep the motorcycle maintained, well-oiled, and moving in order for him to have the balance of the experience of nature and the elements. So we decided, I convinced my friend Kevin here in the foreground to, I had just been accepted to the University of California, Los Angeles on the other coast. So Virginia's on the east, UCLA is on the west, and I needed to get out west. So he had just purchased this beautiful camper van from Volkswagen, and I said, let's use it. Can you drive me and drop me off in Los Angeles? And he said yes. So we set off on a 4-month journey. We covered 12,000 miles, about 15,000 kilometers, and we slept in the car. We picked up hitchhikers. This is a fellow we picked up. He was a violinist in the Prague Philharmonic. It was 1991, so the Eastern Europe had just gained its freedom, you could say, and he decided to take his money that he had earned as a violinist, and he was going to go to the only place he knew in America, which was the Wizard of Oz, so Kansas City. He flew from Prague to Kansas City, and then he goes, wow, this is flat. And so he started hitchhiking, which I guess parents don't want to hear that their kids are doing. But he assembled, so he's wearing sandals from Tijuana, Mexico, shorts from the University of Arizona in Phoenix, and a Grateful Dead tie-dye t-shirt from some Dead show that he went to throughout America. So we picked him up, had him in the van for, I think, a week or two, and it was that kind of a trip. So we kind of took people in and left them off. And of course, it broke down a couple times, so we had to also continuously fix it all the way across. So we drew a map on the side of the car, and we started to dot out our trip across. And the funny thing is, when you start to map out our trip, we came up with this really silly idea that this trip and where we would go was basically just doing the VW sign across America. So I was on the white part, and then my friend Kevin went back on the red part back home. He dropped me off at UCLA, and that's where, again, your mind kind of expands. I had Professor Edward Soja, Postmodern Geographies, Rayner Banham's Los Angeles and the Architecture of Four Ecologies, and then Mike Davis, The Ecology of Fear. These are maybe texts that aren't so widely read here, but when you actually look back, and I'm sure all of you have now seen the devastation and the fires that have been going on for 2 weeks in Los Angeles. When I came to LA, and I lived there, again, sort of 3 years, I experienced earthquakes, I experienced mudslides, and the LA riots in '92, where a good portion of South Central was burning. This is the LA Coliseum. This is man-made fires. This is not natural-made fires. But there were also wildfires, similar to what you have. And you begin to understand the relationship between sort of ourselves and nature. The other impression was the Salk Institute and Louis Kahn's work, but not so much the architecture. What I really appreciate, and again, this is why LA is such a great laboratory, is the urbanity. And this is Louis Kahn's drawing of Philadelphia through just sort of mapping out the movement of people and cars through the city. It's got a really beautiful kind of smaller square grid. And I began to realize that I kind of was as interested in urbanity as I was into designing buildings. The summers between my years at UCLA, I worked as a camp counselor at Camp Bloomfield for the junior blind. So I worked with blind children for 3 months. And the thing I learned from working with sight-impaired kids was that the blind are also colorblind. So they don't view you initially by who you are. They don't make an assessment of you. They just hear your voice, and they touch your hand, and they start to make a different type of impression. So for my thesis at school, I realized that we privilege sight so much that in school, everything's visual, prioritized. So just the mere fact that you actually present on a vertical surface means that you are away from the actual material because you have to have a certain distance to see it, and you're always talking about it in visual terms. So I decided on my thesis it would be a table, horizontal. You would touch it first and then look at it, and you'd be so close to it that you wouldn't assess it from a kind of visual perspective. So that was the thesis that I presented, and I got really into the sensorial phenomenology of kind of architecture. Same time, I'm reading Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldmund, where it's two brothers. One brother chooses to go the path of God and is in a monastery, and the other brother chooses to wander around the world and work in different trades. And this is, of course, called Auf der Walz. You might have something similar in Holland, but these are journeymen that just go around for 2-3 years collecting experiences. So I went, after 6 years of college, I decided I didn't know anything about architecture. I decided to go Auf der Walz. And I spent 3 years going to Germany, Mali, Switzerland, Italy, Russia, Lithuania, and Sweden, where I literally sort of followed the footsteps of Aldo van Eyck, went to the Dogon region in Mali. I ended up building and rebuilding sort of earthen, rammed earth projects. I went to Hadrian's Villa, surveyed with Robert Mangurian, Marianne Ray, found these tufa tunnels underneath Hadrian's Villa that led to the actual refrigerator where they used to keep things cold. Lithuania, did some stone carving, and then finally glass blowing in Sweden. And it was there that I opened a magazine to learn about glass art. And I learned about Seattle as being sort of a major destination for glass. And I ran into this guy, Dale Chihuly, a glass artist. And he and I was about 26 at the time. I spent 3 years working in his studio. Went to Pilchuck Glass School, which is a school where you can further train. So I had done some studying in Sweden and then continued those studies in Seattle. And I not only blew, but I also cast glass. Casting is much easier to learn than blowing. Blowing takes a good 6, 7, 8 years. And I became a kind of architectural assistant, because his work was going from a gallery scale to an architectural scale. And I ended up working for him, helping him in Venice. This is in Jerusalem, the mechanisms that you can see there that hold the glass. In Iceland, with a group that did installations throughout the Blue Lagoon and other places. So that takes you all the way to about 28, 29. And then I decided I needed to either continue this material kind of journey, or I wanted to basically go into architecture. And I decided to take a year off and travel to find the right path. So this is Timbuktu in West Africa. This is in inland Turkey, near Ankara. Damascus, Syria, which is probably not looking like this anymore. A snowstorm in Jerusalem on Easter Day. You can look up the weather report. This is 1998. Amritsar, the Sikh temple, Kathmandu, Vietnam, Laos, Vientiane. And afterwards, I truly decided to do the path of architecture, that this experience and these material searches had finally allowed me to get to a point where I could actually do something. And just sort of to finish off, I worked in my first job on a Jewish synagogue for 1,000 people, and the project leader of the office, actually, she left, and it put me in a position that I suddenly had to do the construction administration. So I was able to speak to the very tradespeople of masons, steel workers, and glass kind of finishers, so that I could actually see how that learning on the Walz was able to be applicable to the work. And here's the ark, which is sort of the bima and the ark, which every synagogue has. And if you notice, it has wood, it has steel, it has glass, as a very sort of modern interpretation of what an ark typically is. And the rabbi was so cool. He got this glass ark. And sometimes it was hard to read actually what was written, the 10 Commandments. So he told his congregation, you only have to abide by the commandments that you can read. So on this day, it was like 7 you could read. That led me to come back to Europe. I worked with Baumschlager Eberle architects in Austria, Dietmar and Carlo, working on UN AIDS headquarters in Geneva. And they have just this incredible aesthetic of really being purists in terms of the materials they use. And then I go from there to the Biennale. And I encourage you all, go to the Biennale's opening days. These are 2 days at the beginning. That's when everyone's there and everyone's really willing to share. And I met Bjarke and Julien there, and that really led to the past 19 years, almost 20 years of working with Bjarke in, again, lots of different materials: wood, steel, concrete, working urbanistically, Superkielen, Smithsonian, the Brooklyn Bridge, a 140-year-old kind of structure, and just really realizing that the urbanity and the scale of infrastructure was what I really, really enjoyed doing. And then finally now going to Bhutan, where we're creating this kind of inhabitable dam where you can actually walk up the side of the dam. It's a pilgrimage and has a Buddha and a temple in its heart. Or an airport that is built across a river delta where we take the sort of Bhutanese carving and again, bringing this kind of quality of handcraft, but now introducing the robotics to actually create an airport that is and expresses the Bhutanese kind of soul. All the way up to space and looking at the moon dust as an actual building material. So in closing, of course there's a lot of projects, but for me, the biggest and the one that I love the most is the office itself. And just designing the study trips that we take every 3 to 4 years to different places. Some of you have actually been on those trips and understand them. We took everybody to Burning Man in 2018 and built this crazy orb. The exhibitions, which are a way of communicating the work that we do, which are also the books. And right now, having the chance to actually discuss materiality through 10 issues of Domus. So I get really excited when I start drinking, and I saw that Furman put this on as, that I tend to lift people. So this is just something that is, it's 30, 40 years now of lifting people. Sometimes I'm lifted. You can go to Skallgubbar, for those of you who do renderings, and you can find a lifting image of me lifting Daniel Sundlund in our office. You can now put that in all of your renderings. So, thank you so much. This is the next generation of lifters, my 2 kids. And I really look forward to having a drink with you. If I were to put myself into a drink, it would be a Finnish gin and tonic with cranberries, rosemary, and would love to stay in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It also was longer than 20 minutes.
Sorry.
Well, I will try to keep the interview to a couple of questions.
Yes.
But it was very beautiful to learn many things of you that literally had no idea. So there are so many things. Such a story. Actually, I was laughing a bit because you did so many things before you started the typical work as an architect that my mother will have said, "What are you doing? What are you going to do with your life?"
Yeah, I think I had 2 incredibly understanding parents who trusted the choices that I made. And I think I never knew what the outcome would be in these choices, but I felt that they would all kind of converge at some point in time. And my parents supported that.
Which is great. To stick to the couple of questions that I had prepared for you, one is that obviously big embodies the image of a successful practice for many people, but I wonder, how will you define success?
If you were to ask what is our kind of win ratio? But I'm saying, we probably win 2 out of 10 efforts, right? So I think if you were a footballer and you would only get the football into the net 2 out of every 10 attempts, you would be sitting on the bench. And the same is for lots of other kind of sporting events. Architecture is a pretty tough sport. And so success for us is something that we kind of call, I think, an evolutionary kind of design where your failures in the eyes of society, where you don't win a competition, is not a failure. It's actually a building block that you kind of learn and you layer upon, and that takes you somewhere else. So when you do look at the work of Big, it's a layered work where you can actually see evolutionary kind of iterations and thinking. So I would say everything has kind of elements of success. It's how you both approach it from your view on life and how you then use those learnings later in life.
Maybe in a more personal way, how will you define a personal success in life? I'm not talking about
a project,
a practice of architecture.
I mean, in a way, survival is pretty exceptional. I think of that every day with 2 kids, 3 and 5, that they have every opportunity to inflict a lot of harm, and it's my job to make sure that they don't. So I think it's a constant work, and you're constantly there's no day off in trying to make a successful life or make successful kind of decisions, and you just got to roll with things. I also think one of the things that was in the back of my mind growing up is that even if I turned out to be a janitor in some godforsaken place, I would find a way to be the best damn janitor in that godforsaken place. Like, I would find the beauty and find something that I could find that would benefit me. It didn't matter, like, there isn't kind of like some sort of scaled value system. Everyone is contributing and everyone has a purpose. Does that answer?
Yeah, of course.
Right.
Sure. The next one that I have prepared for you is that Big talks about hedonistic sustainability. And I wonder how does it resonate, or how do you integrate joy, or this? How do you integrate that in your routine, in your everyday life?
Hedonistic sustainability grew out of what you could call a very puritanical insistence by the sort of tree-hugging sustainable view, which is windows should be smaller, showers should be colder, walls should be thicker with more insulation. There was a kind of tendency to make sustainability about maybe a less joyful life and with less comforts. So I think hedonistic sustainability grew out of, is there a way to create a more enjoyable life? Because you would be very likely to get a larger group to adapt or to move in that direction than if they felt that it was a puritanical kind of less is more. And so I think it boils down to, are there ways of using when we build something, the energy and the embodied carbon and all of that, are there ways to make those investments pay a dividend multiple times, not just once, but if you can create kind of an energy loop, and that energy loop feeds another loop, and that you actually then are able to think more systematically across buildings and across streets and neighborhoods, that's the kind of hedonistic sustainability that we think of.
I was asking about how do you apply that to your to your routine, to your personal life? Or is there a way to apply that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you make choices every single day that you're either, you're able to kind of balance the pros and cons. And so I think when you seek something that is more enjoyable and that you will then also, propagate, and you will also seek, and you do that for others, and others feel that, and maybe you educate in the same sense, then that's what we do every day. That's what I do, I hope, in my choices.
I wonder, let's try to, if to keep it, I feel bad about Donna. Donna talked way less than the both of you, so she will have more time for the round of discussion. I would. How much sustainability are we able to compromise for the sake of hedonism?
If you define hedonism as being hedonistic in, I think, the way that you're thinking of it, it's not about partying all the time and just that type of enjoyment. Hedonism, as we see it, is just that could there be ways that you benefit your life in positive ways? And could it be that you suddenly, if something is very recreational and you start to move your body, isn't that good for society that you have a healthy body? Rather than making things all about, the building systems turning a building down to the lowest kilowatt hours per square meter per use. I mean, that's a fine kind of goal, but that goal should be in perfect balance with that enjoyment of life and being healthy.
I have very last one, so I will keep one about how will you define good architecture, sustainable architecture, maybe for the round of discussion, but only one and maybe a quick answer on. With the growth of big that you have experienced, what have you struggled the most with? Because that must be, it's a huge thing. Also, there's a lot of responsibility at the same time. I don't know, how has that been for you?
We've experienced every punch to the gut that all of you have. The financial crisis of 08-10, the flooding in New York when we first opened our office, we were flooded out of our office, or now, COVID and the downturns. Those punches to the gut where you're having to kind of like do things in real time and assess and guess what the future is going to do. Those are pretty tough when they come. But then you're also ready for them because the human condition, I think, is one that it's never just even. It's very temperate. It's very biblical. Being in a church right now, so learning how to live in those biblical times is important, and is a big challenge.
I guess now with politics in the U.S. and with the current situation, let's see what comes.
God help us.
Let's see. Kai, thank you for the wonderful talk. We appreciate that a lot, and that you are here with us in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And we are going to start a round table discussion in a few seconds. So first,
yes.
For now, thank you a lot.